A warm welcome to a tutorial on SharePoint Object Model targeting SharePoint developers, either aspiring developers or existing developers. First, we will discuss what is SharePoint Object Model. Then we will understand why we are learning about SharePoint Object Model. Then how to access the SharePoint objects using minimum 5 techniques and also the sample applications. First of all, what is an object model? Technically, a collection of objects or classes through which a program can examine and manipulate some parts of its world. For example, in the real world, you have the fruits family, and then you have the vegetable family, and within the fruits we have apple object, and then pomegranate, avocado, or within the vegetables we have tomato, etc. Similarly, you take the case of the HTML page which you see every day. Any web page you open, it runs on the document object model, which is nothing but a hierarchical model where you have the document, and every document is a collection of elements like HTML element, and within the HTML you have the head and the body, and within the head you have the title, and within the body element you can have various anchor or paragraph or headers. So this is a sample of document object model. Now what is a SharePoint object model? SharePoint object model is a collection of SharePoint objects or classes through which your program or code can examine and manipulate some specific parts of the SharePoint world. So if you look at the history long ago, a SharePoint server, or even now if you have on-premise, you have the farm object at the top. Then you have web services and you have the web application. And within the web application, we can have the tenant, on which tenant has the site, and within a site you have the subsite or website, and within each subsite you have the list, and a list can have list items, and you can have generic site columns or fields and content types. So overall, this is the history of SharePoint server-side object model. Now we are focused on the client-side object model. Now, why am I talking about SharePoint object model? Because SharePoint development is changing very drastically. It may be good for trainers because students have to keep learning, but as a coder, as a developer, it's sometimes frustrating that you have to keep on learning too much, and it's changed very drastically. Long ago, it was only C# or declarative, and then came Sandbox, which is outdated, and then came NAPA, which is outdated. We have SharePoint hosted app, provider hosted app, which is outdated, and now we have SharePoint framework app, which is a recommended standard, and it might be stopped and something else might come up. So you always have to continue learning. But there is something which you have to know always. If you are a SharePoint developer, this is something which you all already know. So if you know about the SharePoint object model, if you know the foundations, you can really grasp any kind of technology that keeps coming in SharePoint, be it graph or be it SPFX or anything coming up. You can definitely grasp the things. The time spent on learning will not be that high, and you don't have to worry that some new things are coming. So just like ABC is for English, similarly the object model is fundamental for SharePoint development. Now need to know the objects. Then what else you need to know? You just need to know the CRUD operations. That is, it may be like viewing, reading, updating, or deleting the SharePoint objects. I highly recommend that you don't actually delete, because many get scared that item is deleted. So just focus on read, update, or just read. Read is enough. With read itself, you can do lot of applications. Now coming to SharePoint Online. What are the most common SharePoint Online objects? We have the site, and then the list, and then the list item, the columns or content type. So the most frequently used is the list and the list item. So, and what are the other SharePoint objects in the object model? We definitely have come across people frequently using user, group, lot of questions on files, folders, attachments, search, taxonomy. So there are a lot of objects and many more based on your needs. So there are a lot of objects in SharePoint, and these are the most common things which are mostly used in the SharePoint world. Now you have various objects. So what will you be doing? You will be either doing a web app or a mobile app or a tablet app or just a business logic. And what is the logic you'll be doing? Most of the time it's just creating, reading, updating, deleting a couple of SharePoint objects. So this is all related to the SharePoint database, which is actually SQL Server. Now, what are the ways you can actually handle the SharePoint objects? Obviously, with out of box. So many times, as an administrator, out of box is more than enough. Suppose you want to see the list, just go ahead and see the list from the URL. But if you want to create 10 sites, or if you want to break the roles for 1000 list items, then you might need to use PowerShell. And we have PNP, which is fantastic. You have PNP for both PowerShell and PNP.js, which condenses the 1000 lines to probably few lines. So you don't have to break your head writing the code again. It's already available for many SharePoint objects, and for administrators, PNP PowerShell is more than enough many times. Then you have the REST. So recently, REST is fundamental or must for a developer to know. And so REST is very powerful because whether you know JavaScript or C# or Python or PHP, using REST you can do stunning apps. So what has happened is long back only C# was the way to code, and recently any developer can come to SharePoint and start coding apps. So that way all a developer needs to know is how to call a REST API, how to read the JSON results, and how to display that in a proper style of his or her own choice. Next is the CSOM. Why coming to CSOM? Because sometimes REST may not be available. In that case, CSOM is very powerful because it provides everything. And last but not the least, JSON may be outdated, but still, if you are a JavaScript coder, JSON is also a nice way to do in case you want to show the data in the user interface and not just do the processing in the backend. So I start with PowerShell because it's a very simple tool to help you understand the coding for SharePoint object model. There is no complex install, needed, and you can do it for both online and on-premise. The learning curve is very easy and it's simple, superb, and you can do crude operations on almost all SharePoint objects. And once you just understand it, so I'm not telling you to do in PowerShell. Once you just understand it, you can just extend that to any apps based on your requirement. So if you have no coding needed, just go ahead and use the end user way. And if you want to do it just once from you and you don't want to start coding, you can just use the REST URL and just get the details. And if you want to just code in few lines, then do PNP. And the most powerful is CSOM. In case PNP is not available or REST is not available for a particular object, then go ahead with CSOM. And once you do that for a few objects, you will be able to extend that to other objects like user, site, or columns based on your needs. So you start off with one object and you can happily extend that to other objects. So to understand all this, so I'm just mixing up various techniques and the various objects. For demo purpose, first we'll start off by doing the REST. So we'll start off by REST URL. So REST URL construction for search. Then we'll try to create a communication site using PowerShell. Then we'll look at JSON and CSOM. So I have a SharePoint site, and let me say I want to search for a term called kiwi. So I give a search and certain results are obtained. Suppose I want to find the results from the REST URL. What I will do is I can go to the URL and just give underscore API. A REST URL starts with underscore API slash the object. Now we are working on the search object. So let's do search, and then I'm going to give the query. So now I'm going to give the query string with the query text. So the query text I'm going to give as kiwi. So this is how I construct the REST URL and I can get the details many times. So I'm just targeting administrators first. Sometimes no, they want the GUID or they want some hidden data of a particular object. So the REST URL can be extremely powerful. Mostly it starts off with API followed by the web or search or any object you need. And all the REST URL is available in the Microsoft site. You can just refer Microsoft and get the REST URL you need. So most of the times the developer's task is just to construct the REST URL based on your requirement. Next, let's try to create a new communication site. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to call a post request or create an object. So here is a couple of code. So what I'm going to do is I have downloaded the necessary client-side DLLs and I'm just going to call the invoke REST method and get the form digest value. So this digest value is needed when you are actually calling a post request in SharePoint. So I use the API context info URL and get the context form digest value. And using that, I'm just going to call the next REST object where I'm calling the method post. So whenever you post an object, you need to get the data. So the data we will look for this particular case, and then I'm going to call the content type application JSON or data purpose. So based on your programming language, whether it's JavaScript or C#, you can just write the code. Most of the times it's all about for creating object, it's all about adding the headers accept application JSON, then getting the form digest value, and then finally again calling the REST method with the post query and giving the data. Now let's come to the SharePoint communication side. I have to give the data. So make sure there are no spelling errors. Okay. So go to the Microsoft site. So one headache I have with this REST API is the spelling error. For that sake, I go to CSOM itself. But overall, just make sure there are no spelling errors in the data. So Microsoft has given the syntax. So what is the data? You go to the Microsoft site and they have given the syntax and just change the URL based on your needs and give the target site and the user and the API. So for API URL for communication site is API site pages communication site create, and I'm just calling my custom function create SPObject and I'm going to create the communication site. So let's just run this. So I've run this and a new communication site is created. So look at the new communication site. So I think it's making an impression on others. So look at the new communication site. It has nice documents and pages and it's pretty good. So you can create a new communication site with the REST API. So you need not do the exact same lines of code. The underlying concept is to get the REST URL ready starting with API. Then you have to get the form digest value using by calling the API context info, and then you have to pass the X request digest and the form digest value, and finally you call the post method giving the data mentioned in the Microsoft site, and then of course your URL and the credentials. So this is all, and the advantage is the code remains the same. So probably one time you have to write a code for creating, reading, updating, deleting, and based on your object the URL alone will keep changing and the code will remain the same, be that JavaScript or C# or PHP or any other code. The code will remain the same and only the URL will keep changing. So that's the advantage of REST. Now let's move on to PNP. So PNP is fantastic. I really feel that PNP is one of the best. All you have to do is install the PNP PowerShell Online module. For JS, you have to install PNP JS, and this is very nice. Once you install it, then you have to connect to the site you want with the credentials. And once you connect, there are tons of things you can do with just one line, especially if you're an administrator. PNP is extremely powerful, so I am expecting that you will not be just using one PNP line of code, you will be doing many. So start your code with start transcript and go to the folder, and let's start off by sending an email. So all you have to do is just call the PNP mail, give the user ID and give the subject and the mail. As simple as that, and you can send a mail if you want. So let's start by actually adding a file. Suppose I want to add a file, I use add PNP file and then I give the path and folder. So just give the method. Let's say I want to add a hyphen PNP. So there are so many things you can do. PNP content type, custom action file. You can just call the help method and they will explain to you how to do. Okay, so most of the things can be done in PNP. In case anything cannot be done in PNP, then go for CSOM. My personal favorite is always CSOM. But PNP is extremely powerful. You don't have to type large lines of code. You can happily do with just few lines. So let's just run this PNP file. I'm just going to upload a local file to a SharePoint assets folder. So once it's uploaded, let's go and see. So I just go and the image is uploaded. So this can be really powerful if you want to upload many number of images to a SharePoint site and also probably take a nice trekking. It's a nice image. So many times I've observed that SharePoint teams generally upload the team outings in SharePoint site. So this can be very powerful to upload the pictures you have taken or any pictures as bulk into SharePoint site or from SharePoint site locally. Next, let's try to send a nice email with send PNP mail. When I just run this, I'll just wait for some time and I'll open the email. So I just see the email. So let's not try that. I see that Shine Bright has been sent. So from PNP demo, I've just sent a mail, Shine Bright. So the opportunities are limitless. There's so much you can do with PNP itself. PNP is really awesome. I'm actually writing a book on that and hopefully it should be done soon. So a lot of PNP scripts you can just contact Erwin and you get nice scripts on PNP. PNP many are using. I highly recommend PNP. It's very simple to the point. It's pretty self-explanatory, just like English. So if I want to add a file, I have to just call add PNP file. So if I want to add list item, I have to call add list item. If I want to remove, I just call remove hyphen PNP whatever object. So it's very simple and readable and very fast also. Next, let's look at a JSON script. So whether it's CSOM, C Sharp or JSON, the overall logic is first you get the client context, then get the object you need, then load the objects and call execute query. So then your work is done. So for example, I'm going to add an item to a list. So I have an input box called text name. And then in the create list item, first I'm getting the client context using sp.clientContext.getCurrent. Then I'm getting the object using get underscore web, get underscore list, and using the title, get by title of the list name students. Then I'm calling the sp.list item creation information and I'm calling the add item method, and once it's added I'm just calling the set item. So in C sharp you just have to just put a dot and just title equal to or something, but in JavaScript you have to use set underscore item or get underscore item, and let's say for title we are getting the property from the text box. Next we call the update and call the load and execute query method. So a code will succeed only if you call the execute query method successfully, and in the query succeeded you do one thing and you catch any errors in the query failed method. So that's it. And so most of the code will change for every JSON object. For every object, the code will obviously change, but the logic is the same. You first load the client context, then load the objects you need, then either do the add or read operation, then call if your update is needed for add and update operation, and call the load objects and finally call the execute query. So only this particular step where you're going to get the objects will mostly change. So this is how you do the JSON script, and once that's done we can just add a script. If it's a classic page you can just add a script using the script editor, and you can actually convert the JSON script to SPFX also. The detailed steps are given in Microsoft site where you can actually convert a JavaScript JSON code to a SharePoint framework app if needed. So let's just try to do a demo. Let's say I'm just going to add a student name called David, and I'll select create list item. If it's successful, it is giving the ID that list item is created and the student is added to a list. Next, let's move on to Seesaw. So many times you might be interested in using the SharePoint Seesaw or Manage Seesaw, where we are going to install the SharePoint DLS, and once you install the SharePoint client-side DLS, they'll be installed in the C program files, common files, Microsoft Shared Web Server extensions 15 or 16, so the latest is 16, and ISAPI, and there you have the Microsoft or SharePoint or client or DLL, and based on the object you need, you can add the DLL you want. Suppose I want to work on the search DLL, then I add the reference to search DLL also. Then I have to call the client credentials, SharePoint credentials using Microsoft or SharePoint or client or SharePoint Online credentials. I'm passing the username and password and I'm getting the context. So that these are the steps, and I'm just, let me run this particular code and let me give the password. So once it is successful, next we can go ahead and start working on the object. So over here, let me just write a simple script that will search for the pictures. So the search query, I'm just going to give as content class colon STS list item picture library. So search is very interesting, where you can search for different items, list item or pages or libraries. So over here, let me just search for a picture library, and I'm just calling the SharePoint or client.search.query.keyword query and giving the context, and I'm calling the search executor, and using this I'm calling the execute query. So make sure that you always keep yourself updated with the latest code from Microsoft. That's the only thing. Otherwise, most of the time CSOM is pretty good, and you should be able to do many things which REST or JSON is doing. CSOM should be able to do. Even if some things are not possible in REST, it should be possible in managed CSOM. So the search has run, and it is giving the title and the path. So that so I've uploaded a lot of SharePoint comics for learning, and it's showing the path as well as the title. So let's just try to open one. Let's say we are trying to open this one. So it should be. So it's definitely showing the image file only. So let's come back and do a quick review of what we have seen. We have seen how to construct a REST URL starting with underscore API slash object like search. Then we created a new communication site using PowerShell REST, where you have to get the form digest value using the API context info URL and then pass the body and the post query. Next, we looked at the JSON and how to add a list item using JSON. And also we saw a simple seesaw where we used the search query to list all the pictures in the site. So there are so many permutations and combinations. It's up to you. It's purely up to you. You have various objects like site, list, library, files, folders, or attachments, or user, group, roles. So based on your needs, you can use them. So most of the times it is tremendously useful for administrators who want to automate tasks. They don't need to contact a developer. They themselves can do heavily with the help of PNP PowerShell or just REST API. And for SharePoint coders or strong developers, this is fundamental, where this is all you need to develop SharePoint hosted app or SPFX app or provider hosted app. And the recent one is SharePoint framework app. So when to choose what? So most of the times if you're not worried about the UI and just worried about the business logic, and you like C Sharp, then you go ahead for C Sharp console application or PowerShell, or the rest URL can still be applicable in C Sharp code, and you can do the provider hosted app. And if you want JavaScript, or you don't know C Sharp and you know only PHP or other programming languages, then you can use REST, and you can, if you like JavaScript, you can use JSON. So the recommended approach is actually uh, REST. You definitely have to know how to construct a REST URL in SharePoint recently, or even graph URL, and you must know how basics of HTML, CSS and how to construct or read the JSON results and display that in a data you want. So let's look at some sample applications. So there are many number of applications which you might have already done or you might be planning to do. So let's look at some few applications, let's say for PowerShell. So for PowerShell, I see that many want to see the reports. So for government organizations, I had to use PowerShell where I could see the reports which show the data of data of SharePoint sites. Or let's say we want to show the reports of unused sites, or many cases there are cases then people want to break the role inheritance for all subsites. So based on your needs, PowerShell can be used to automate with the help of simple for loop. So let's look at a simple demo of a report of a news sites. Then we look at a Google chart which is using a JSON code. Then we look at a REST app in a classic page and also SPFX app, and a latest graph app which is simply using a graph API, or you can use the REST API also. So I've used PowerShell convert to HTML, and this is a list of the sites which are unused for a certain time period. So using PowerShell, I can get the list of reports. So the reports, I can generate tons of reports based on various needs, either to generate the list or libraries, especially for migration. You want to do generate some reports, this can be extremely powerful. So here is a simple Google chart where I'm just using JSON. This was done long back. So I'm just loading the necessary JavaScript file, and I'm giving the list name, the x-axis. So pretty much you need to just get the HTML, CSS, JavaScript code to load the object. So over here, the data chart.push, I'm just going to first get the list items using the client context or getweb.getlist by get by title, and I'm just getting the list items, and I'm pushing the value into the data chart.push with the value I got from the list. So this is a simple application of JSON and Google chart. So we saw a search query, we can search for a keyword. Suppose I want to search for the documents which have been created today. The keyword is right equal to today. So using that, I've created a script where I'm just actually just getting the calling the search query, reading the results and getting the URL. And when I click this, it will just open the URL which I have worked on. So I created a new page called MS, which is nothing but a which is having the new SPFX app. So I've actually converted that code to a SPFX app, and this is a SPFX app now. So let me just refresh this page, and now if I just try to click this get today's work, it should be displaying the link. So the applications are immense, or you can create a SharePoint hosted app also. So here is a sample graph application where it is a special REST API for whole Office 365 objects, where I'm just reading using graph API to read the SharePoint list items and display them on my SharePoint on my normal HTML site thangu.com. So if you want to access your SharePoint objects from Android or iPhone or many other things are possible with latest Microsoft Graph. So the applications are many and the limit is just your imagination. So most of the times you can think of ideas, be they for a custom list or list items, or the columns or the content types, or for user groups or search or files or folders or attachments. And just think of an app, or just if you want to do something on an object which cannot be done on the UI, you can happily use the code and do that. And most of the times it's just a simple create, read, update operation. You can start off by just using the read operation, and hope this tutorial helps you to become strong coder. This is the fundamental. So the option is completely yours. Either you can use out of box itself, or you can use PowerShell PNP or PowerShell CSOM or PowerShell REST, or REST and JavaScript, or C# and REST, or you can use manage CSOM in PowerShell or Visual Studio. And finally, you can also try JSON. And all these, any of these method, whichever way is comfortable, you can use that and extend that to Azure Jobs or You can call that in Microsoft Flow also, the REST APIs, or you can create SharePoint Framework app or hosted apps. As a quick summary, we learned what is SharePoint Object Model, and we saw why we need to just understand SharePoint Object Model, since that is something which will not change even if the technique of SharePoint development changes. And we saw how to uh, do SharePoint CRUD operations on various objects in SharePoint using PowerShell, PNP, REST, CSOM, JSON. And we saw some sample applications like SharePoint Framework app or a simple JavaScript app using Microsoft Graph or PowerShell scripts. Hope this helps you. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.